My name is John Passfield, and I'm going to read from my novel, Pauline Johnson, Know Who I Am. The title of this video will be Pauline Johnson, Video 3, an interview with Pauline, Part 1. Here's the cover of the novel, Pauline Johnson, Know Who I Am, a novel by John Passfield. That's a photograph of the historical Pauline Johnson. Here's a summary, which is on the back cover of the novel. Pauline Johnson was born on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, Canada. Was she American, British, or Canadian? Was she Mohawk, English, or mixed? She added up her assets and her liabilities and decided that the Pauline that the world would see would be Pauline the performance artist, Pauline on stage. As for the real Pauline, she would keep that to herself. Here's a note which I put on the back of the title page. Such terms as First Nations, Indigenous, and Aboriginal were not in common usage at the time at which the events of the novel take place. To refer to her mother's people, the historical Pauline Johnson used the terms English and white. To refer to her father's people, she used the terms Indian, Mohawk, and red. While the novel is fiction, I've used Pauline Johnson's terms throughout the novel in the interests of historical accuracy. The outer frame of the story is this. An older lady, Pauline Johnson, has retired from her career and is living in Vancouver. She's a celebrity, as she spent many years on the stage and has published a number of poetry books, and some of her poems, such as the song My Paddle Sings, have resonated with the public and taken their places in the culture of the day. Now, a young newspaper reporter asked to come and interview her. The main character is suffering from cancer and is taking drugs to kill the pain. So there's some question as the novel goes on as to whether the interview is imaginary or real. There's 16 chapters of interview, so to keep the readings to a reasonable length, I'm going to read 8 chapters of interview in this reading and 8 chapters of interview in another video. So let's look at chapter 1, page 4. I'll just find it here. There's 16 chapters in the novel. Each chapter, excuse me, clear my throat here. Each chapter has about 50 image units. 4 in each chapter deal with the interview. So I'm leaving a lot of the imagery of the novel out and concentrating only on the interview. Here we go. Well, hello there. Welcome to my home. Come in and sit down. You're exactly on time. I admire that in a person. I put the kettle on when I saw you coming up the walk. Oh, no, I have nowhere else to go. I assure you I have plenty of time. I'll be glad to tell you whatever you care to know. That's on page 4. We move over to page 5, leaving out about a page of other images on other topics. So this is where I live. I call this place my home, although it's what the English would call rented digs. It's the first home I've had since I left what I might call my ancestral home. Well, my ancestral home? Oh, that's just a phrase I use. It was a large house that was perched above the Grand River in Ontario. But I shouldn't say was. The house is still there. It's just that there are no Johnsons living there now. Well, that's page 5. We skip page 6 and move on to page 7 for the third section of 4 in this chapter. You seem like quite a self-possessed young man. You ever been a reporter long? You must have decided quite early what you wanted to be. Sorry to start by asking you questions. I seem to be interviewing you. I have no idea what you want to know about me. But first, let me make a cup of tea. Then we can settle ourselves down and have a good talk. There's nothing more stimulating to conversation than a nice cup of tea. Then we go over a page to the 4th section in this chapter. Yes, I saw the questions you sent. No, I didn't read them at all. I just glanced at them and then I set them aside. Were you worried that I would say no? Is that why you prepared the questions in advance, or were you afraid that something important would be left out? I assure you that I've been interviewed many and many a time. I know enough to protect my interests, if that's what you're worried about. But I also assure you that I have nothing I wish to hide. Well, okay, then we move into chapter 2, and that's on page 12. So again, leaving a number of pages of images on other topics out. My ancestry? Oh, you mean my family? I can see where your readers might have a certain curiosity, though there can't be much about me that isn't known. Of my family, I'm very, very proud. My father was a chief of the Mohawks. The Mohawks see themselves as the elite of the Indian tribes. My great-grandfather was Tekahayanweka. My grandfather was Sakayang Weritan. Both were known by their name Johnson, of course, which is, of course, a European name. My father was George Henry Martin Johnson. Onwanishishan was his Indian name. He was appointed by his own mother as a Mohawk chief. My mother was Emily Susanna Howells. She was born in Bristol, in England. She came to this continent when she was just a little girl. They were as in love as any two people could possibly be. 30 years married. Only death could sever them apart. Then skipping a few pages again, we go to... My siblings all had many names. Henry Beverly Johnson, my eldest brother Bev is how I always thought I am. Eliza Helen Charlotte Johnson. We always called her Eva for short. She's the one who's living here in Vancouver with me. Alan Wanwanash Johnson, my second eldest brother, and myself, Emily, Pauline. We were as typical, I would say, as any family could be. My race? Oh, well, I'm classed legally as a Mohawk Indian for government purposes. I grew up at Chiefswood, which both is and is not the reserve. I spoke English and always dressed in English clothes. My father spoke 8 languages, 7 Indian languages, and English as well. I never learned the Mohawk language, as I saw no need. I only learned what interested me. I didn't see myself as Indian or white. But don't you get tired of talking about race? Surely your readers have no interest in hearing what I would have to say on that topic. I had plenty of ideas on that issue when I was young. Now, hardly matters what I would say. And then we go into chapter 3 of the interview. Yes, I plan to stay in Vancouver permanently. It's very pleasing after many years of travel to finally put down roots. I have a few health issues, but I can't see dwelling on those. I'm reading the legends of the Capilano people. They were told to me by the late Chief Joe, in my words, but the storyteller in the stories is an elder who would be about his age. The legends will be published as a book. Actually, I have 2 books that I'm looking forward to having published. The other is a collection of my stories that have appeared in magazines. Another page further on. My sister Eve is visiting me. We grew up together, of course, at Chiefswood, our childhood home. I don't know how long she plans to stay. There's a group of ladies that has been very helpful. Oh, they've helped me in any number of ways. Sometimes a cookie and a cup of tea is all one needs. It's the people of one's life that make it worth living, don't you think? I can see when I close my eyes every person I have known in my 50 years. I can hear every conversation that I've ever had. And then a couple of pages further, we go to this. No, I won't be going out on the road anymore. My performing days are over. I'm having a much-needed rest. How nice to meet a young writer who's starting out on life. You have your whole life ahead of you. Though no doubt you've had a few adventures along the way. I never assumed that a young person is a blank slate. Go ahead and ask me any question you feel you might want to ask. But I'm afraid you won't find me to be the subject of an explosive expose. I have little to reveal and little to hide. Yes, it's lovely here in Vancouver. It's a wonderful time for me, a pleasant chapter in what has been an interesting life. Some days I take a walk in Stanley Park, and other days, be it weather or inclination, I stay inside. Sometimes I read my own poems and stories and legends, some of which have been published and some have not. Some of my thoughts will never see ink and paper at all. But every thought has been a precious moment for me. I count them as one would count drops on a window pane. And then we go into chapter 4, again, leaving lots of imagery on other topics aside. My health. Well, thank you for asking. Well, let's just say that I don't expect to die anytime soon. My health has never been an issue, meaning that my health has never been allowed to intrude. One deals with one's health, whether of toothache or of heartache, as well as one can. I'd say that my health is still quite reasonable for a body of my age. I certainly hope to live in Vancouver for many a year. I have no fear of death, if that's what you mean. Death gets closer at every stage as we move through life. That we're born to live and born to die is the blunt fact of existence. It's more a question of how one bears up over the years, how one measures up to the standard that one has set, how one deals with the cards at hand, as one might say. I suppose that the way one deals with death is to look it straight in the eye. Let it come when it may, let it wait around the bend, live the life that one is granted day by day. Excuse me, I'll just clear my throat here and we'll go over a few pages. To page 32. I've had some significant deaths in my lifetime. I'm sure that they've deeply affected me. The death of my father, my mother, my eldest brother. The recent death of Chief Joe. What we don't think about on the surface or talk about in conversations, no doubt is active at a much deeper level of our minds. My grandfather died when I was still a girl. At one time I mourned. At the time I mourned, of course I grieved his death. But there was something that I'm still trying to understand. Do you believe that there are people, everyday people in our lives, who mean a lot more than it's possible for us to consciously comprehend? Do you mind if we get away from this subject? All you wanted to do was ask about my health. It was a courtesy on your part, nothing more. Coming to see an aging lady, one with a quiet, sedentary life, fishing around for topics to give her something to say. Health, for me, is that which one does not think about unless there's something wrong. Don't you agree? So perhaps we could change the subject and move on. And now we go into chapter 5. Marriage. Did I ever consider marriage? Well, let's just say that I was engaged and then I was not engaged. And that will be enough to say about that. He was a young man whom I met in Winnipeg. Well, of course, I was young at that time, too. Career, racial differences, change of heart? Which one are you guessing? Too young to know what we wanted? Later regrets or no regrets? Or a little of each? I'll leave you to wonder what the story of my engagement might have been. Excuse me again. On the road? Well, you know, I was always welcome in every home. All kinds of people came to see my act. I played in almost every community in Canada, from coast to coast. I stayed with the families of farmers, entrepreneurs, cabinet ministers, society ladies, and workers in the mines. I made friends, as much as one can make friends on the road, of people of every race and creed. The secret is, simply, to see each person as an individual person. That's how I saw them, and that's how they saw me. But when you're on the road all the time, you have no roots, you have no community with which to share sorrow and joy. You spend many hours alone, in an empty room. But surely this is not what you came to hear. And then over a couple of pages more to this. Was I interested in acting? Well, I had a very visible limitation that kept me from the stage, and that was simply the color of my skin. You can change the color of your dress or the color of your hair, but you can't change the color of your skin. People just naturally want to see themselves on stage. Perhaps I could have had a long career as a lady's maid. The day when Desdemona can be black or Hamlet can be Asian will be a good day. Sarah Bernhardt has played Hamlet, a female playing a male, but she is a far better actress than am I. I feel that I've experienced all the great roles in my life, Phaedra and Medea, La Dame Camellia, but never got to portray them on the stage. You seem to be fishing around for a topic. Is this the kind of thing you want for your interview? Did your editor tell you specifically what to ask? Oh, yes, I forgot that you sent some questions on ahead. Well, I only looked them over, what I would call superficially. Some of them could have been quite painful to answer, Not the kind of questions you'd expect a complete stranger to ask. But go ahead, ask me any question you want. At my age, what could I possibly have to hide? Okay, now we're moving into chapter 6. Ah, yes, the song my paddle sings. Well, of all my writings, that has certainly been my most loved, my most requested, my most enjoyed. I suppose it will be the one to carry my name. People quote it to me everywhere I go. Yes, I wrote that poem in my canoe. I used to canoe quite often on the Grand. I kept my canoe all summer on the flats below the house. I wanted to capture a mood, a feeling, a sense of life. I had a writing box, I still have it, with a pen and ink and paper, which at that time I took with me in my canoe. I stopped paddling and sat and scribbled and let the canoe find its own way down the stream. I always like to do something old. I always like to do something new. At every performance, the people were waiting for that poem. Perhaps I was a victim of my own success. When I wrote new poems, I had trouble fitting them in. I had so many poems that people were eager to hear. The critics complained that my act was, let us say, threadbare. But the people disagreed. How could I drop that poem and substitute something else? Then over a couple of pages, again, leaving out a couple of pages of images on other topics, which comment on this. But we're leaving that out in this reading. A professor came to one of my shows. He asked me about the poem. He wondered what the song my paddle sings meant to me. What was the paddle? What the canoe? What was the water? What the eddies? What the flow? Everything stood for something else. The paddle cannot be a paddle. The canoe cannot be a canoe. The professor wanted to know what each of these images meant to me. We were standing at the back of the hall, a church in one of the prairie towns. We were talking as the people filed out the door. Well, I'll tell you, Professor, I said. The professor's ears were on high alert. A number of people stopped leaving and gathered around. I recited the whole poem again, line for line and word for word. Those were the only words on that topic I cared to say. They told him exactly what the poem meant to me. Now, chapter 7 in the interview. So, what exactly is your angle? Yes, it's newspaper jargon, as you would know. I told you I've given many interviews. An exotic Indian princess in a mood of reflection in the glow of her sunset years? An aging vaudeville trouper takes stock as the footlights fade to black. A flamboyant grande dame spins fabulous tales of a long, extraordinary life. I never sit down to write unless I first made a plan. Surely you have some expectations that brought you here. Just what are you hoping to gain from this interview? It's been a long and fruitful life, long and enjoyable life, a long and productive life. On some topics, I don't want to go into details. Some topics I discuss, but you notice I keep it brief. And for other topics, I gladly give free rein. Oh no, I'm not sorry that you came. No, I love a good interview. Would you call what we have here a duet? Or perhaps a duel? Then a couple of pages later. Do you know what I have learned? That people are simply people. Famous writers are just people, after all. May I make a small suggestion? Why not let the fame go by? Write your article with none of the grand dam trappings at all. A younger person interviews an older lady. The older lady tells what she feels she has learned. Perhaps the younger person would care to give his views. Oh, did I recite for the Queen? Is that what you came to ask? Well, that's always been a rumor. Promoters like to use that phrase when they advertise. Yes, I did go to London. Yes, I hope to read my poems before the Queen. It seemed the best way to climb the ladder of poetic success. I had letters of introduction, even one from the Prime Minister of Canada, if you please. Now, how do you think it all turned out? You think I got to read my poems for the Queen? Then the last chapter I'm going to read from in this video reading, but I'll read the rest of it in another one. Chapter 8. Remorse. Yes, there's been some remorse, but you agree that a lady doesn't talk about affairs of the heart. Of course, there are poems that come close to giving my secrets away, as you have implied, but they are couched in terms that disguise what is closest to my heart. They could be dramatizations of stories that I've heard in hotel lobbies, or perhaps from fellow passengers on the trains. One is always thinking of relationships. One is always thinking of things about which to write. I take a notepad and a pencil wherever I go. One has quite complex relationships with the people of one's life, much more complex than one has with a person sitting next to one on the train. My mother, my father, my first partner, Owen Smiley, my second partner, Walter McCrae, my eldest brother, Bev, my sister Eva, my brother Alan. All of these people might well have been grist for my poetic mill. Few of them, you'll agree, appear on the surface of my poems or my stories. In fact, I'm sure it's correct to say that the only people in my life that a reader such as yourself might recognize as autobiographical would be my mother and my father. They appear as George Mansion and Lydia Bestman in my works. Why change the names, you might well ask? Well, fiction allows one to make a few changes, just the details, not the shape, what one ate or whether it rained on a certain day. And then the last two that I'm going to read in this video, perhaps this is too superficial. Perhaps you want deeper thoughts than these, the thoughts behind the thoughts, as one might say. Well, I'm not a confessional person. I live my life, as it were, inside. I have thoughts I would never express in an obvious way. Private thoughts for public consumption? I suppose that describes what some people would think is a writer's trade. But a poem is not the same to me as an interview. Every one of us is human. Everyone faces terror at times. Everyone grapples with a personal demon or two. You say you see me as self-composed. Well, I am. I've learned to cope. I have learned to keep my feelings on a leash. But everyone, I submit, is human. Fires burn hot in every breast. Some people keep those conflagrations completely concealed. So I'm going to stop there. That's the end of chapter 8, or the end of the interview in chapter 8. A teaser maybe. Is she going to kind of break wide open and reveal her feelings at more depth? Or is she, as she says, a person who keeps her feelings on a leash? Well, tune into the other video, read the novel if you want to know. What do we know about ourselves? What do we not know about ourselves? What do we present to others? What do we not present to others? We are highly complex individuals. We draw on a vast number of sources of imagery in order to make the image patterns, which are the thoughts of our minds. We exchange indications of meaning by sharing imagery of significance with others. We also, I am sure, exchange indications of meaning by sharing imagery of significance with ourselves. Our minds are the scenes of constant meaning negotiation, as one compartment or element of our minds is constantly dialoguing back and forthing with not one, but many compartments or elements of our minds in order to arrive at some form of consensus as to what the import of the imagery of our lives can possibly be. Now, when we do not have a consensus, we have a problem. We have the tragic characters of the greatest poetic plays. When we do have a consensus, it is never simple, as there is always, I assume, a minority report. Pauline Johnson, the main character of this novel, jousts in imagery with the young reporter, who might be imaginary and might not be. She also jousts with the various thought centers, the various image producers of the many aspects of her mind as the story goes on. What she comes to think of herself, whether she reaches inner peace, uneasy or otherwise, is left for the thoughtful reader to decide. Now, the novel, whoops, I bumped the laptop there, is Pauline Johnson, Know Who I Am, a novel by John Passfield. It's found on Amazon. There's information there. It's found on my publisher's website, rocksmillspress.com, rocksmillspress.com, with more information there. On my website, johnpassfield.ca, johnpassfield.ca, there's 2 free books. A planning notebook. I get an idea. I work through a writing process. I keep notes. And if you're interested in writing process, have a look. It's there for free access. When I get a rough draft, which in this case is 16 chapters and 50,000 words, I take about a month to polish. And as I do so, I make notes on that particular novel, this one. In this case, novels in general. It's an ongoing process, just learning how to write novels, how to learn to express myself in the novel writing form. So if you go to johnpassfield.ca, 2 free books you can have a look at if you're interested. Lastly, I'll just say thank you for watching this video.